Have you ever wondered what would happen if we accidentally bought something gigantic? What if that something was an entire city? Way back in 1946, in an Australia that was just waking up from war, there lived a man, Albert Knight, whose name from that day on would be spoken with a smile, a little incredulity, and a good dose of hilarity. His story is not just a funny anecdote, it is proof that sometimes life, with its twists of fate, can far surpass the wildest of fantasies. Get ready because we're about to travel to the heart of the Australian outback, where a routine auction turned into the legend of a man who, through a misunderstanding bigger than the Great Barrier Reef, became the owner of an entire town, Udnadatta. Imagine Albert Knight, a businessman with a nose for business, but perhaps on that fateful day, with slightly less than usual acute hearing. It's 1946, a year of new beginnings, of opportunity, but also of confusion. Auctions at that time were vibrant events, crowded with people, noisy, and with bids flying like flies in the outback summer. Albert Knight was no fool, on the contrary, he was an astute buyer, one of those who know a good deal when they see one. His passion? Land. He loved the land, watching it grow, giving it value. That day he had a very specific target, a small specific piece of land he had set his sights on, or so he thought. Udnadatta, a name that evokes dust, endless spaces, and the rugged charm of the Australian outback. A remote town, but no less vibrant for that, with its shops, its houses, and a historic train station that once pulsated with activity. At the time, however, Udnadatta was a bit like an orphaned child. It had no formal owner, it belonged partly to everyone and partly to no one, managed by whoever lived there, but without a real master in the legal sense of the term. And it is here that our story takes a decidedly unexpected turn. The auction was held in a feverish atmosphere. The air was thick with anticipation, the buzz of voices mingling with the insistent call of the auctioneer. Albert was there, with his plan, his sum in mind for that little piece of land he so desired. The auctioneer began to describe the object of the sale. Words, phrases, and numbers flew. Knight, intent on following the bidding, raised his hand, confident he was betting on that one property he'd studied. Bid after bid, his offer rose, with the unshakable conviction that he was getting closer and closer to his goal. But fate, as it often does, had a sense of humor all its own. The auctioneer, with his booming voice, kept pointing at Albert every time he raised his hand, an action that in his eyes meant a bid for the entire town. In such a chaotic environment, amidst the crowd, the heat, and the excitement of the moment, misunderstanding was in the air. Albert didn't hear the word whole town, or perhaps he interpreted it as a metaphor, the town crier's colorful way of saying a nice piece of land. His attention was focused on the battle for his lot. Every time the auctioneer called out, Knight's bid, Albert felt the adrenaline rush of a hunter closing in on his prey. Little did he know that he was actually about to capture an entire herd. And then, in an instant that froze time for Albert Knight, the gavel struck wood. Sold, boomed the auctioneer. And with a mocking smile of fate, he added, Tonight goes the entire city of Udnadatta. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by a few surprised murmurs. Albert, his hand still in midair after the last offering, felt the blood drain from his face. His ears, which a few seconds earlier had ignored the crucial detail, now amplified those words like a deafening echo. The entire city? Udnadatta? A mistake? No, not a mistake. A disaster? Maybe. A cosmic joke? Absolutely. The expression on Albert's face at that moment must have been a masterpiece of disbelief mixed with pure horror. Perhaps, if he'd had a camera, we'd have a viral image of his face today, symbolizing all the misunderstandings of history. An eternity had passed, or perhaps just a second, but his mind was reeling. He had bought up shops, houses, the railroad depot, and all the surrounding land, everything that defined Udnadatta, including its residents who, while not commodities, now found themselves with a new de facto owner. The news spread naturally, like wildfire in a dry field. Before you knew it, everyone knew about Albert Knight's incredible deal. He wasn't just a man who had bought too much, he was the man who had bought a city. By mistake. Now imagine the scene at the Knight house when Albert returned, pale and wide eyed. His family, accustomed to his business ventures, was ready to hear yet another story of a good deal. But this time the deal was decidedly out of the ordinary. When Albert, with a trembling voice, recounted what had happened, the first reaction was, naturally, pure hilarity. His wife, a practical woman and perhaps a little exasperated by his eccentricities, could only initially remain speechless. Then a laugh broke out on his lips, a liberating laugh, perhaps a little hysterical but undeniably amused. Albert, what have you done? He must have exclaimed between laughs. It was an accusation that sounded more like a declaration of love for his eccentricities. The children, well, the children were fascinated. Owning a city? It was like something out of an adventure book. They already saw themselves as little desert monarchs, Ikishanadasochi with Udnadatta as their kingdom. The idea of having an entire country to explore, to call our own, was an exhilarating prospect, far more exciting than any toy. The Knight family in one fell swoop had become the royal family, or almost, of Udnadatta, and the inhabitants of Udnadatta. How did they react to this very unusual news? Remember, Udnadatta had no formal owner. For them, the idea of being owned by someone was already a novelty in itself. And what about the fact that their new master had arrived by pure chance due to a gigantic misunderstanding? The reaction was a mixture of amazement, curiosity, and surprisingly a contagious enthusiasm. They were practical people accustomed to living in a difficult environment, and they had a great sense of humor. The accident was seen not as a problem, but as an opportunity. An opportunity for a little fun, yes, but also to bring some attention and maybe some improvements to their beloved city. When Albert Knight, still a little shaken but with a new sense of responsibility, went to Udnadatta to get to know his new possessions and his new fellow citizens, he was greeted with a warm and unexpected welcome. There were no angry or suspicious faces, only amused smiles and curious glances. The residents of Udnadatta, perhaps more than anyone else, understood the comical nature of the situation and decided to embrace it. After all, it's not every day that you get bought by a man who just wanted to buy a piece of land. Albert, for his part, took the situation with incredible sporting spirit. He didn't complain, he didn't try to cancel the purchase. Perhaps he understood that fate had played a trick on him, but it had also offered him a unique opportunity. Instead of feeling trapped, he felt in his own way responsible. He began to study the city, to talk to its inhabitants, to understand their needs. He was not an absentee owner, on the contrary, he became a true benefactor. He helped improve local infrastructure, support small businesses, and breathe new life into Udnadatta. He had bought a town by mistake, but he decided to make it his own, not only legally but also in his heart. The story of Albert Knight and Udnadatta has become a true legend in Australia, told and passed down from generation to generation. It is the story of a man who, through a gigantic misunderstanding, demonstrated that even the most glaring errors can lead to unexpected and at times even wonderful results. This story teaches us that in life things don't always go as planned. Sometimes a small mistake can turn into an epic adventure, a challenge that leads you to grow and do good where you never expected. Albert Knight's mistake wasn't a failure, but a springboard for him and the entire Udnadatta community. It was an event that brought people together, brought laughter, and ultimately left a positive mark. It is an ironic and incredible reminder that life, with its unpredictability, is an orchestra of possibilities, where even a wrong note can create the most fascinating melody. So, the next time you feel frustrated by a small mistake, remember Albert Knight. Remember the man who bought a town by mistake and who turned that mistake into the funniest and most moving story of the Australian outback. A mistake that made a man and a city legendary. If this story of laughter and disbelief has fascinated you, don't miss the next video that pops up on your screen.